Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Thanks for joining us in this episode of SRE Practitioner Series. I'm your host, Suresh GP. I'm pretty excited to have today our guest, Ash Patel, joining us from all the way from Brisbane. Thanks, Ash. Ash is an independent reliability advocate, and we thought it would be appropriate to get his viewpoint around some of those reliability challenges that exist within organizations and get his perspectives on how we can do things better as both as an individual as an organization to address reliability as a first-class citizen. So with no further ado, I welcome Ash for this session. I hope you're doing well and staying safe.
Thank you for having me on, Suresh.
Excellent. So Ash, give us a little bit of a background on your journey and what prompted you to become an advocate of reliability, right? There has to be some driver that has made you reach so far. So give us a rundown of your memory lane of why this caught your attention and what was so important about it.
The funny thing is that I explain this to people and they find it to be one of the most nonlinear stories they've heard in a while. So I actually was running operations at a healthcare org for close to 15 years. And toward the end of that tenure, we faced a lot of issues with reliability in our software. We had done a digital transformation in the early 2010s. And over time, we became more and more dependent on cloud-based technologies. And our vendors were also having that same change. And what we were finding was that a lot of the people making the software that we were dependent on did not know how to make it reliable. We were having downtime, we were having errors, all kinds of issues. I'm going a little emotional now thinking about all the problems that we were facing. And I thought this must not be an issue just for us. And I asked people who are dealing with this kind of software, and they said, it's a daily problem. It's something we deal with every day. And it's something, especially in sensitive industries like healthcare,
Right.
transportation, et cetera, I don't think this is something we should be having to deal with.
Right.
And that's why I went on somewhat of a crusade to bring about reliability without being affiliated with any particular vendors, working here and there with some vendors to just help get the message out, but not on a commercial basis.
Right.
So I started SRE Path in 2021 as a non-profit way to get the message out.
Excellent.
And,
You've been doing a great work, and that's why I think it's important for the viewers to understand some perspective. So let's jump into the specific aspects. And you said you have a good amount of experience on healthcare, so let's start about that. The way that I look at this one is based on your experience, Ash. Can you outline some common reliability challenges you have experienced in the industry perspective, particularly in healthcare, considering that's more sensitive towards data privacy, and they're still living with a lot of legacy systems in place, and there's a mix and match of it. I'm not sure if every hospital industry has gone towards the cloud native approach. So give us a sense of what does it look like in general in healthcare from a reliability challenge perspective.
So if anyone wanted to have a real challenge with hybrid, they should definitely look into something in the healthcare space, because there's a lot of trust issues with certain pieces of information, patient data in particular. But going back to your original question about what reliability issues were in healthcare, is mainly the downtime that we'd experience. And clinicians are trying to access critical information. They've got people sitting in front of them. They're trying to provide them the advice. They're trying to make decisions on what's next and trying to then pass on the information to primary care physicians.
Correct.
Without access to that information and waiting for minutes to hours, that just is not good enough. And that's one of the biggest issues we had. Reliability coming as a downtime issue, as well as software just not working how it's supposed to be.
Do they even know the impact of the this part when it comes to a vendor or a service provider on this part? Because we still have SLAs, contractual agreements and stuff. I'm just wondering, particularly in the healthcare space, because of the time is of critical essence. Are we not sensitizing this whole ecosystems around the impact it could create based on this downtime?
Yes, there's an issue with that. I mean, clinicians are now used to just complaining daily about, okay, blame the technology, blame that, blame this. And I don't think they should be having to do that. That's something that as technologists, we should be considering, that these are people, like, if you're in a serious issue, you're going to a hospital, you're going for some kind of treatment, you're going to even get your chronic health checked.
Right.
Do you want them to be struggling with the technology, right? If we're
Right.
the people making the technology, it's in our interest to not make that happen.
Right.
Now, going on to the thing about SLAs, I find that the legal apparatus for chasing down contracts with vendors is not as strong as maybe it is with enterprise like finance and other organizations like that.
Sure.
It's not as a robust practice to push down on SLAs.
Correct. No, I agree with that part of it. And sometimes, Anna, you cannot do penalties and incentives just like that because they don't work. Sometimes it's more about human to human relationship to make them feel that, this is the problem. Can you please help? Rather than just going to the escalation route and saying that you're wrong, I'm going to penalize that. It sounds great in paper, but in reality, you will bleed because you still need them to support your underlying technology, infrastructure, applications to do that. So I pretty much agree that it's not easy as we speak. But that gives us to the next part. As we use a lot of technology and we want to make sure technology is seamless, how has it changed the way that reliance on technology has impacted these aspects? Are you seeing that with the newest technology, with cloud natives and stuff, we are seeing a lot more predictability and trust in the systems we manage? Or is it still a long way for us to reach that state of nirvana where we can say that, yeah, we have reached that part, so everything works seamlessly as we see through it? Because I think this is a critical part, right? As technologies, we want to bring the new, latest technology that is much more containerized, cloud native. Well, that's all great. But integrating this all together at one and stitching all this together, how much of that is being reliable today? And where are we in that journey?
I think there's a lot of patchwork going on in a lot of places. And I think we've still yet to achieve nirvana. Funnily enough, the tagline I had at the beginning of SRE Path was for the pursuit of software nirvana.
Right.
I don't think we're there yet, especially in other industries where it's not so much focused on investments and making sure that the money is going in and making sure that's all happening. The budgets are not as high in other spaces that do rely on technology as much now. That's the only way I can put it without going too much into the negative side of it.
Sure.
But the budget issue is definitely there, and people are just doing patchwork and not really validating whether this is actually all going to work effectively.
And I think the part of the problem, Ash, is that we don't look at this end-to-end value chain. And we still are isolated with the work that we do. We do a good job in what we manage. And a holistic understanding of the value stream, value chain, and the whole customer journey is somewhere lost in that particular maze of proving ourselves to be relevant. Do you see that happening most of the times, that people are just bogged with their own, my scope of work? I don't care about what's happening in the left-hand side and the right-hand side. In fact, the left-hand side doesn't even talk to the right-hand side. Is that also a big reason that we are still seeing this patchwork?
Well, that's the thing. I keep on seeing this anti-pattern of people trying to say we're integrating everything, in particular DevOps, for example, and they're saying we're bringing operations to shift left towards developers, and now we have a title DevOps engineer, and now developers are saying, well, the DevOps engineer will handle everything else. We just handle the features, right? So in terms of that tunnel vision that people have of this is my job and nothing else, I think it's still there. And reliability has that challenge. I think that's the challenge. Security is not so much of a challenge to get across the organization because people think naturally about it, but reliability is still something that I think we need people to think more of, that it's not just the SRE's job. It's not just something the DevOps engineer does on their spare time, in their spare time. It's something that everybody needs to think about when they're building the product, when they're building the software, when they're designing the software, that it's already baked in rather than dealing with incidents.
And you make a very important point of, I wouldn't call this as you call them yourself as a reliability advocate. How much of the time do you spend to educate these people about this whole reliability conscious? I'll put this as a conscious, saying that we need to take due consideration when you start from the beginning. And are people open to that understanding about reliability? Because my firm belief, Ash, is that if it's not tied to their performance goals, if it doesn't impact their overall game, they don't care a lot about it, right? All I care about is, have I done my job? I've got my paycheck and I'm out. So how do we instill this whole reliability consciousness when you play this role of an advocate? Because sometimes you're like changing or uprooting this whole organization from one side of the spectrum to another side. It's just not that easy. So how have you handled as a reliability advocate to make it happen?
Well, the first thing is the incentive structures are definitely not aligned with making reliability a part of people's jobs.
Right.
People generally are told, make the software and you're done, or launch the software and that's your job in operations.
Right.
The reliability aspect definitely can and should be integrated into their job descriptions in some form, because then that does contribute to other outcomes. Reliability can be associated with other things like security. DevSecOps is a big part of SRE work.
Right.
And bringing that reliability mindset can also support other initiatives, performance, security. all these other areas. It is a challenge. It's going to continue to be a challenge because, like you said, people are going to say, well, I've done my job. But that's never stopped me. I was walking down a road in Toronto a couple of months ago, and some developers were actually talking while we're waiting for the lights to change. They were like talking about, oh, yes, the tracing and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, I don't think they actually know what they're talking about. So I stopped them mid-walk while we're walking along, crossing the walkway, and I said, do you actually know a little bit more about this whole thing that you're talking about? They're like, not really. We just attended a talk that one of our engineering managers told us to attend, and we're just trying to figure it out. And I said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Do you know about observability? And he said, no, not really.
Right.
So there's a challenge in getting developers to understand it. But I think the first step is to make it something that's interesting for them, make it part of the work that they already have. And that is still a challenge that I'm working on.
Sure. And people needs to be inspired by what isn't for me. I mean, why do I need to care about it? So how is it going to make my life a lot more easier, the job easier? Because I think even today, as we do consulting coaching, we see a lot of people bogged down on the monitoring aspect of it. Observability is a distant dream. They interchangeably use this word called monitoring and observability. They think that a bunch of tools can help them to move towards observability. But there are some prerequisites before you can even jump into that particular bandwagon. So do you see organization as they thrive still there in the observability path, or they're still figuring out a path towards tuning the alerts and thresholds and monitoring to get somewhere around reliability?
There's still a lot of room for improvement. I've spoken with a lot of people who are working in a lot of organizations, and there are people obviously at the forefront of all these practices. And I speak with a lot of those people more so than the people I'm educating these days, because I'm trying to understand how I can bring in the most useful practices and then disseminate them. So the people that I speak with regularly, they tell me alert fatigue is still an issue. Thresholds are still too low.
Right. And it continues.
And
It continues to a lot of extent.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And there are myriad, there are so many aspects. Observability, data flow issues. If you're using a lot of open source tooling, you're going to have to figure out the data pipeline yourself.
Right.
To a large extent. How do you make that work? And people are doing all kinds of things. They're experimenting. And that's the beautiful part of it. For me, not so beautiful part if it fails in an organization, but you have to do these things to make it all work in observability. And, that's the mindset that I've kind of tried to instill in people, that SREs, the pure form of SRE, is Google had said, people who will experiment. They will actually create new ways to solve a problem. And I talk with those people a lot, and I'm trying to bring those ideas out, that there are still problems, a lot of problems in observability to solve.
Absolutely. So can you share us a specific example of a reliability issue which impacted customer trust and loyalty in a healthcare organization, particularly because people love these use cases, because then they start resonating with why reliability is important to start from the beginning. So any use cases that you can share will be of help to our viewers.
Sure. I remember actually one particular moment that has really stuck with me, because I was visiting site, checking the networks and talking about a few changes we were making with regard to IT. And one of the clinicians actually had, so we did, let me go back a step and give you a background as to what we had in one of our sites. So the clinician will actually sit with a patient with chronic health issues, and go through their history, go through all their charts, and try and understand where there could be issues, because they would have issues that a primary care physician would not be able to figure out. So these people are highly trained clinical practitioners who then support the doctors, the GPs, to understand what issues these chronic health patients are having, because doctors are just too busy to.
Sure.
They get 15 minutes to see the person. They cannot sit with them and understand all the various myriad things that they're going through. So in that scenario, I walked in, obviously not on their consult because that's breaching privacy, but they were having a consult, and the patient actually walked out, and they said, tell me when you figured out your computer problems.
Wow.
And I was thinking, okay, what just happened here?
Right. And
Right?
I think sometimes we think that people are tolerant about these things. Oh, it's just a glitch, a minor glitch that we can fix it out. And probably even if it happens for one time, they're just doubting, are you taking seriously my time into consideration, or you're just being too busy being busy about fixing it?
Exactly. People value their time, right? So they take the time out of their day to come and see you at a particular time, especially if people are working or they have other things in mind, and they're coming during business hours to see you for an hour or half hour, whatever session time it is. And then if this software is just, load time is slow, it just drops all of a sudden, and then the clinician's on the support line, what's going on? And that's just not what a patient wants. They want the clinician to be paying attention to their problem, not to the problem that is on the screen.
Correct.
You know, that's just how it goes for anybody.
Absolutely. And in terms of direct, indirect cost for downtime, is that being even measured, Ash? I'm just thinking that if you don't have a metric to look at downtime of a system not being available, and how does it impact from a revenue as well as the reputation part of it?
So I suppose it depends on the kind of place you are at. So per site, if you have a downtime of an hour, a couple of thousand an hour, so that's the kind of cost.
Right.
If you talk to guys in banking, for them, they're like, oh, that's table stakes, you know. But
Yeah.
you know, when it's a smaller organization and it's not just a public company that can afford to lose money, it's run by actual people who you talk to who have put their life savings into running a business or
Sure.
an organization, you know,
Sure.
it's a very different story. You know, the clinicians actually invest their own money into the business itself to be there.
Absolutely.
So for them, it is important. You know, that downtime of losing a couple of thousand in revenue, it's important.
Absolutely. It hits it pretty hard when you're a small organization, but also on the reputation that would I even come back next time? I'm not sure if this works. It takes a long period of time. There's no point in fixing an appointment by the time it was, it's going to take a couple of hours more. So I need to plan probably half a day, which means impact to my work. If they get paid as a contractor, then I don't get paid for that particular time as well. So there's an indirect cost towards this whole episode of how they actually see that revenue impact both for themselves as an organization, truly, right? So is there a framework that is available to address non-functional requirements? Because I think as developer community, we focus a lot more on features, look at velocity, things great. But traditionally IT operations, people have been, and I spent about 5 years for development and 10 years in operations. My heart beats more towards the operations side of things. But the point is that the non-functional requirements like capacity, availability, continuity, all of those stuff, is there a kind of a quality framework that you advocate in software? And how does the ISO standards help you to validate whether you're doing the right things in the right manner?
I would like to say that there is, but there isn't really a go-to framework for organizations to follow. Everyone has to kind of create their own. I tried to launch an initial one 3 years ago, and it got a lot of traction. People were trying to follow me up on it. They still ask me about, hey, when are you coming up with a new one? Because it was very rudimentary. It was very patchwork. I just put it together while I was still busy running an entire business. You know, we were multiple sites. So like I mentioned, one site would lose a couple of thousand an hour. As multiple sites we'd have to worry about for that kind of issue.
Right.
So I just put something quickly together, and it got a lot of attention from people who are running reliability and DevOps in organizations. And ISO style framework might be useful for Europe next year because there is and this is not to get mistaken with DORA, the researchers in
Right.
DevOps,
Right.
but the act is also called DORA by the
Right.
EU, Digital Operational Resilience Act. So there's a requirement for you to ensure, for people in finance, insurance, etc., to assure that their systems are resilient.
Right. That's a great point, and I'm glad that you made it to our attention that there is a focus on reliability, and particularly in the industry that we are talking about, financial business verticals, banking and financial services and insurance and stuff. It becomes important because sometimes, and I'm telling you why this is important, Ash, because sometimes we don't follow things which are nice to have. We follow things when we are mandated to have. Sometimes these standards, these regulations force us to do certain things. So that way, it actually does a bit of good for the overall ecosystem because now I'm forced to think about reliability. So everybody in the value chain starts thinking about reliability as a first-class citizen. Then the experience is getting a lot more better for the customers, for people to navigate through. So that's the good thing, and hope that they can replicate what Europe is doing to other regions as well, so that we all have the same share of opportunity to contribute. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the misconceptions.
Sure.
I'm a big part of the anti-patterns and myths around the whole page. What kind of misconceptions are there about reliability in non-big tech industries, right? So we know tech industries make sense, it's all good. But we're talking about non-big technology industries. What is the perception of reliability? Is that even a thought? Is that a thing that we can bring it about? What's been your experience?
It is definitely an afterthought. There's no way to go about it than just saying that. It is an afterthought. And like we touched on earlier, people say, well, that's not my job. My job is to make the software, or my job is to run the service that push the software out. Reliability is not in my job description. My job is to have the platform up and running, the cloud systems up and running. So that is a challenge. The other thing is that management is not too fussed in a lot of vendors because they say, well, if we don't have a legal requirement to do it, or they're not going to push us hard, we have bigger, better lawyers. Doesn't really matter.
Right.
I think, unfortunately, that is going to continue until reliability becomes something that is considered valuable. And I think we're at the cusp of it becoming important because we're going to have more critical systems. If we're going to try and do more advanced things like better AI and self-driving vehicles, things like that, you're going to need to be reliable. You don't want the cars to stop running in the middle of a highway, for example, if you're doing self-driving vehicles, because that's going to all run off edge computing. It's going to be running off all this communication that's happening in real time. That needs to all be reliable. And that's not just something that the old school reliability guys, I talk with a lot of engineers who do reliability in the non-software context. They've been doing it for 30, 40, 50 plus years, right? This is a new concept, new-ish concept to software to even have it as part of the mix. But I think it's going to happen the same way DevOps happened and really took off in around 2014, 2015. A lot of organizations that didn't care about velocity started caring about it because that meant really meeting that value they had of customer centricity, customer intimacy, of being able to build products and build features faster than the customer could even think about them.
Absolutely.
That was, yeah.
And I think one of the things is, we talked a little bit about reliability. We talked about in tech firms. We talked about non-tech firms. Let's talk a little bit about small, mid-sized segment companies. And we don't have a lot of resources, startups. They're shipping new software, right, to go to the market. They're very upbeat about pursuing their entrepreneurial dreams, and they know it's important to host this. So how do you advocate reliability aspects or reliability initiatives when we have limited resources and competing priorities? It becomes so difficult. I'm going to weigh my time towards, am I going to spin a new shiny feature in that sprint? Are you going to focus on refactoring and doing some reliability initiatives? So how do you advocate for startup companies, smaller organizations that are pretty much looking forward to launch their new product, make it as a big game? What are some of the things that they can get started with in the reliability part?
I think the most important thing is to not treat incident response as your main go-to, as your reliability effort. That is the biggest thing that I keep seeing. And that's a mistake that I made about 10 years ago with a spin-off we did from our organization. We had a secure document management system that we actually then started selling to investment banking and M&A. So that was the exact problem we had. They would say, well, we need your system to be up and running at 2 a.m. Tokyo time. And I said, is anyone checking it? They would say, maybe, but it has to be up. We'll have people checking it, right? So the requirements your client have, you need to meet them. And one of them might be being available at all kinds of times. And in general, you want to not have downtime, because the biggest thing users love doing, the vocal users love doing, is going on Twitter, or X as it's now known, and saying, hey, look, you're down. What are you going to do to compensate me? Do you want to have that effect on a small, medium startup that doesn't have a PR team that can deal with that? Probably not. But going back to prioritizing reliability in your workflows, I think it has to be whatever is important to the customer. What have you seen are issues? If you're not able to see why are our alerts firing this way, maybe you need to look in your observability. If you're having a lot of issues with not knowing whether your system is going to be up and running, and your client wants to know if it's going to be up and running, and they want validation, you go toward the path of chaos engineering. There are various aspects of reliability work that I would like to say break down into capability areas. So observability, DevSecOps, chaos engineering, performance engineering, it can keep going. That you need to decide what is important for you, and then just bring it into the workflows that developers already have. Bring it into the conversation early on. That's, I think, the most important thing, to get the conversation started, because that's the only way you can then bring it into something that's even a priority.
Right. It takes time and effort, but I think they need advocates like you to go there and tell them upfront before they start the journey, because you did indicate in the last time that you said that it's just always an afterthought. Okay, something's broke, we goofed it up, some data breach happens, then we pull up our sleeves and say, hey, come on, let's do something about it, right? But the whole experience of what else could go wrong, and then preempting people of what they need to take into consideration as they do develop, is going to be important. I think as they will get a lot of insights from you, if you become an advocate towards telling people, hey, I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You tell me whether you've thought about it. And I'm just going to leave it to you, whether you want to prioritize or not. Because frankly, that will be our job, aha moment when it says, oh, you know what, we haven't really thought about it. Probably this is the right time to explore that idea. That itself is a good way as a genesis to start thinking about reliability. I think you're spot on that aspect. So our final question is that site reliability engineers, they come, they go, they're expected to battle out with all those tools and resources. What do you think is the future of SRE, and where do you think SREs are going to play a role with the future, with AI coming in, a lot of these technology advancing happening around it? Do we still require site reliability engineers? Do we still see a future for SREs? Is it great time for people to start pursuing the roles as SRE? What do you look at? How do you look at or perceive this whole landscape changing in the next few years?
I still think there is a need for SREs because the technologies may have changed, but the challenges are still the same.
Right.
So SREs can contribute a lot to other areas. Now, they might become more specialists type roles. For example, now there's talk within data engineering space of data reliability engineers.
Right.
So obviously that means upskilling in your data skills, which I think a lot of SREs are already doing. There was a software paradigm, now there's a data paradigm, and now we're moving that data paradigm into a AI ML paradigm. So we can move SREs along that path, and SREs can contribute with their mindset about how we can make reliability a part of all of this work. Because data reliability is a massive issue. Data people will tell you that data is there's so many flow issues. Where are we looking? What observability do we have? Do we even have observability for all of this, right? Do we have secure data? Secure data is a big issue. So SREs can advocate, and I think that's the key word, advocate for all these practices. And I think I saw recently there's a senior staff engineer at a big organization, big manufacturer, I think an auto manufacturer, and his sole job is to push SLOs across the 130 plus teams in that organization. So his main job is advocacy. He knows how to do the work, that particular capability area, and now it's his job to disseminate it. I think that's what SREs will really benefit from, being able to master that skill, the skill of advocacy. You still have to be technically proficient, but you have to also have those other skills that allow you to get those practices across the organization. And like you said, you need to just get together with the developers, ask them the simple questions. Have you actually been thinking about this? And that's, I think, a skill that SREs will benefit from learning. I think it's very related to how it's a role that you advocate for and you talk about a lot on your podcast, BRMs, business relationship managers. They're the conduit between IT and the business, and how to bring about the value in the organization. So I think that's important.
Absolutely. And I think this just reinforces for all our viewers that our roles will evolve, but the purpose of why we brought this at the first place do not change. We need to have a close watch on what's happening within the ecosystems with new changes in technology. How do we adapt and adopt to the moving trends? But reliability will become even more important, Ash, in my perspective as well, is that the customer experience is going to define your brand. Because today customers have the influence of whether telling that your brand is sufficient enough to do it, because every time a downtime happens, there is enough amount of trolling happening on social media and other stuff that you just can't just go and face the audience. So today, the level in which the criticality of looking at reliability and resilience to a greater extent is just unbelievable. And if we don't pay attention to this one, I mean, the implications are pretty dire. The consequences are pretty undesirable. So I think these conversations, these episodes probably reinforce a lot of these points to people to think about why site reliability engineering is a very important area to focus on. And it just gives us a little bit of things of giving back to the community. So thank you so much for your valuable insights today, Ash. I hope the viewers enjoyed the whole thing. So how can people get in touch with you to know about more on SRE path, more to connect with you? What are the options to for people to reach out to you?
Easiest way to engage with the content I've already developed to bring about more of these practices would be srepath.com. If they want to connect with me personally, easiest way is LinkedIn. So Ash Patel, SRE Path on LinkedIn, search and you'll find me.
Awesome. So that's great, Ash. I look forward to seeing you sometime in person. We were supposed to meet when you were here in India and I was there in Australia, but let's keep the conversation going, and you're doing a great work on your reliability aspects on SRE path. So continue doing that, and we probably look forward to seeing you some more nuggets of revelation that happens in your episodes, and we all can stay benefited with that.
It's my pleasure to join you, Suresh. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much, everyone. And we hope to see you in our next episode of SRE Practitioner Series. If you've been watching, if you didn't watch the earlier 19 episodes, you can go to a YouTube channel, go to SRE Practitioner Series, and you can download. They're also available on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify. So you have every option to listen and not miss any of those episodes. So we hope that you enjoyed, and we continue to provide you valuable content with some of the practitioners and advocates like Ash. And we look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you, everyone.